Hello and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin from the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing this week?
Doing great. How about you, Eric?
Doing fantastic. Although I think we've had a short fall and we're heading into winter already here in New England.
Yeah, that's what they're saying. The leaves are down. It's going to be cool over the weekend, but northern New England's supposed to get snow. I think we're dodging that bullet this week.
Well, yesterday we had in a 1 mile radius sun, snow, hail, and rain.
Or that grapple stuff.
Yeah.
Like the snow hail, right?
Yes.
We had that Saturday.
So that's weather in New England. If you don't like it, wait 15 minutes, it'll change.
Hey, Thanksgiving is next week, so it's here.
Yep. All right, so over the past few episodes, we've been talking about planning. We talked about a personal growth plan, a business plan, and one of the things we talked about when we were mentioning a business plan is your corporate structure. And that's really one of the places you have to start. So we're going to talk about that today. And we've brought in to help us Rita Tabraham, who is an attorney who works with contracts and business structure. Rita, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So to start off, what, in your opinion, would be one of the first things someone has to consider when they're looking at different business structures?
I would look at the size of the participants, and how many people wanted to make decisions and how many people there were involved in both the investment end of things and the management end of things. I would also look at whether they wanted the management to be separate from the investment. So that would be my initial consideration. I would also consider what type of business they would like to go into, whether it's a high risk or a low risk business. So
okay, can you give us some examples of what you would consider high and low risk businesses?
Sure, absolutely. So one of the things I've seen is artists, single sole proprietor artists who make things and sell them at local fairs. You don't see a whole lot of products liability in art.
Right.
But something like a high risk would be any kind of high dollar services or something that involves things that are really important to people, like kids, pets, legal liability, medical liability. Those are all, high risk areas. People get really mad when, you mess, when something goes wrong with their children or something goes wrong with their health or their legal situation or finances. So, those are high risk. So.
Yeah, those are the ones that you'd be more likely to have to incorporate in the first place because, the corporation obviously is an entity unto itself. And rather than getting sued personally by somebody, it's better to have that blanket around you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's kind of when I go into something, I look at, like I had somebody, the other thing that I look at too is if it's if the road has already been paved. So for instance, if it's something that is completely new, a new idea, or if it's something that's legally questionable, I might also advise them to have some kind of corporate protection around them. Because you never know what's going to happen with the unknown, I guess is what it comes down to. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, sure. So if you're inventing something, if you're creating something new with technology, you'd want to protect yourself with the corporation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, one of the things that immediately comes to mind is when states started legalizing, the marijuana, and people were coming in and saying, well, gee, it's legal now. And my immediate, reaction was, well, yes, but no. So, that was a situation where I advised corporate protection. If I have a completely new robotics idea or a completely new AI idea or something like that, those are things that I would advise people to get corporate protection around them. So anything that is untested, we don't know how the courts are going to deal with it, the police are going to deal with it. We don't know what the product's liability implications are. Those are all the things that I would advise somebody to, have some kind of wall of protection.
All right. So let's go through the different types of corporate structure, and we'll talk about what the advantages and disadvantages are of each. And let's start with the most basic, which is the sole proprietorship.
Sure, absolutely.
So when would somebody want to be a sole proprietor? Use that corporate structure.
Sure. Again, if you have a startup with low liability with a very limited budget, somebody who doesn't know whether they're going to make it in this particular line of business or not. So obviously you want all of your work or most of your working capital to go towards whatever business it is you're starting up. You don't want to spend all this money on, this huge corporate structure only to find out 2 months from now that you're not going to make it in this business. So if it's a low liability business and it's something where you're just starting off an idea and it's relatively low risk, then I would say, yeah, you just want a sole proprietorship right now. Particularly if you want the fluidity and the flexibility to kind of shape your business as you go along. You might want to be able to, the flexibility to take your personal funds and put them into the business. If you have a profit this month, put them back into the personal funds. That kind of fluidity and flexibility is something that I would say, okay, you're fine with a sole proprietorship right now.
Right. So under a sole proprietorship, there's very little division between the person running the business and the business itself.
Yes, absolutely. So basically we have a I guess you could say a series of increasing distance from the individual. And the where there's the least line of definition is the sole proprietorship. That's you. I mean, you can do a DBA, but at the end of the day, all of your personal assets are still on the line. Your house, your car, it's you. If somebody sues you, it's you. That's pretty much what a sole proprietor is. It's just somebody doing business. And it's usually only one person or a husband and wife. So basically you have incorporated and unincorporated entities. And on the lower end of the division, where there's very little division, is the sole proprietors and the general partnerships. On the high end, where the business entity is completely separated, is corporations and LLCs. And in between, you have your limited partnerships and things of that nature.
All right. So other than the number of people, is there a big difference between a partnership and a sole proprietorship?
One of the practical differences that I see is in a sole proprietorship, again, you are the decision maker. So you're always going to agree with yourself. When you get into partnerships, it's a little bit nicer because you can spread the risk. You're not the only one exposed, but on the other hand, it also means that you have to agree with somebody. You have to have the same business theories and ideas. So what I always tell people going into a partnership is two major things. Number one, don't have an even number, because then you never have a tiebreaker. It is a two-person partnership is the most common form of partnership, but it makes the practicalities a little difficult sometimes, particularly when you start to not agree with your partner. But other than that, a general partnership is pretty much the same. It's unincorporated. There's no filing requirements. You do have a partnership return, so the taxes are a little different, but they're all pass-throughs. So they all end up on your personal taxes, or at least half, or however you build the partnership agreement ends up on your tax returns. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah, in a similar vein, when you get to the limited liability company, you also are passing that through on your personal income tax return, but you're filling out a separate schedule with all the business income and expenses on there to come up with a bottom line there. I mean, I think limited liability companies, we've only been able to do like one person LLCs for what, the last several years or so. Didn't you used to have to have a minimum of 2 people to do that?
It varied from state to state, but that was actually one of the nice benefits of the LLCs. Is that if you were a sole proprietor and you did want some form of separation from your business, you could always form a one-person S corp. But now with the one-person LLCs, that's another really nice flexible option.
Yeah, that's the road that I took myself, and I'm sure a whole lot of other entrepreneurs, solopreneurs out there are doing too.
Yeah. For the benefit of our listeners, let's get into what an LLC is. I mean, it stands for Limited Liability Corporation, but what makes that different from your standard corporation?
So basically what happened was a number of years ago, people were, coming up with all kinds of business structures. And as usual, the IRS said, well, we have our own test as to, whatever you call your business structure, we're going to tell you how we're going to tax your business structure. So they looked at 4 factors. They looked at whether there was a continuous life, whether there was centralized management, whether there was a limitation of liability, and whether there was a free transferability of interest. So basically, prior to that, if you had 3 or more of these, you were considered a corporation. If you had 2 or less, it was considered a partnership or an unincorporated entity. And because of that, people were each of an S corp and a C corp, and each of the partnerships have limitations. And so what a limited liability company is, they actually started in New Hampshire. They're a statutory creature, and they basically say, well, you can pick, and you can it's build your own company is really what it is. So you can decide whether you want the members to manage it, or if you want a sole manager, or a board of managers like you would have in a corporation, or whether you want it managed by all of the members as you would have in a partnership. Then they said that you can decide whether the interests. Let me back up a minute, because in corporations you usually have the management and you have the investors, and usually the investors are the ones that have the limited liability if you look at the overall picture. So again, the IRS, or the statutory scheme for a limited liability company, says you can decide whether you want investors to also be the management, and to also have